This is Maryland Politics Review with Barry O'Connell. Thanks for stopping by. Normally, we talk about candidates. Let's talk this time about the election. What can we learn from the 2024 election? And that's what this program is about today. This is Vice President Harris's vote in Maryland. As we can see, she took the 95 corridor and going from the bottom, Charles, then Prince George's County. To the west of that, above it, um, Montgomery. West of Montgomery is Frederick. And then let's go back. Directly above Montgomery is Howard. And to the east of that is Anne Arundel County. And then we have Baltimore County and Baltimore City. Uh, this is a good Democratic victory. She won the state solidly. She beat Trump across the board, but she won these counties. And you have to keep in mind, the rest of the counties don't matter nearly as much except to the people who live there. I mean, I don't mean to put them down. It's just some of these counties have rather small number of registered voters. Take, for instance, Kent County on the Eastern Shore has less voters than Bowie, Maryland, if you take in the Bowie zip codes. You know, it, these are rural counties. The red counties are overwhelmingly rural. The blue counties are mostly urban, suburban counties. And that was a good vote. Let's talk a little bit about how bad can it get. The bigger map you could see is 1966 George Mahoney versus um, Spiro T. Agnew. You know he was a bad guy. He didn't get shot, but he was a bad guy. And we use his three-part name. Um, Normally, you only use a three-part name for dead presidents and serial killers. Like John Wayne Gacy gets a three-part name. Um, John Fitzgerald Kennedy. Keep in mind when he was president, he was Jack Kennedy, sort of like Bill Clinton is Bill Clinton today. If he had been shot, he would have been William Jefferson Clinton. That's about as bad as it gets. Mahoney ran on an anti-civil rights platform. You know, the vote was so divided. It was sort of like when Ben Jealous ran. Um, he won with about a third of the vote, running on um, an opposition to school desegregation, to busing, to any sort of integration. He wanted strict continuations of the Jim Crow laws. Um, and that's something to understand. In 1966, about a third of the Democrats were still in favor of Jim Crow segregation and were against civil rights. If we take a look at the rest of the state, the red areas, uh, let's go down to the lower map, the smaller map. That's that's a overwhelming Democratic victory, and with a mixture of blue and light blue. When we take a look at the rest of the red areas, keep in mind one of the biggest issues there is race. Um, Maryland still has broad expanses where civil rights is not popular, and generally the areas that are anti-civil rights are Republican. So I know you're going to say at some point in the ancient history, the Democrats were a party of segregation. Well, between 56 then 66 with George Mahoney. Take a look. When George Mahoney was running on an anti-civil rights platform, he lost Montgomery County overwhelmingly. He lost Prince George's and he lost the city of Baltimore. It's the only time or it's the last time that those counties went Republican. That was 1966. In a response to a racist, they went Republican, and that's how Spiro Agnew got to be governor and then vice president of the United States. But without going into that story in too much detail, um, the core of Maryland, the 95 corridor where the bulk of the people are, is strongly in favor of civil rights. Let's talk a little bit about the counties. I thought Talbot is interesting because Talbot is on the Eastern Shore, but it's an Eastern Shore county that voted for Joe Biden in 2020. Um, it went for Trump over Harris. But take a look at the vote. People are talking about it was a huge win, across the state, across the country for Donald Trump. Well, take a look at the numbers. Trump won Talbot by 6 votes, not 600, not 6,000, not 6%. He won Talbot by 6 votes. And that is basically when we're looking at Republican numbers in a place like Talbot, which is a Republican county, um, that's the bedrock. That's the MAGA vote. That's the hardcore MAGA type voter. And let me explain a little bit about MAGA voters for those of you who aren't as clear as you could be. Um, the MAGA voter tends to be lower income, lower education, lower net worth, lower income, all the way across. Now, that's not to say there aren't some very wealthy MAGA voters. There are some brilliant MAGA voters with far more degrees than most people and all that. But by and large, if you take the average MAGA voter, they're they're going to be poorer and I don't want to say dumber. Um, let's just say less education, less money, less opportunity. And then we take a look at Talbot in the Senate race, and we see that Larry Hogan ran about 2,000 votes ahead of Donald Trump, and considerably, 59, almost 59% to 38% over Angela. Let's talk a little bit about this. Keep in mind, Talbot is a county until very recently had the Confederate Boys Monument on their courthouse lawn. They had a monument to the Confederacy on the courthouse lawn. Think about what that means. It would be inappropriate for me to call them racist bastards, but you know, so I'm not going to. But I would say that there is perhaps the biggest part of this whole problem is race. Um, I asked somebody why the Eastern Shore went from Democrat to Republican, and I said, was it because of the big fuss when William Donald Schaefer referred to the Eastern Shore as shithole on the shore? They really got mad about that. That was a big fight. That was back when Clay Mitchell. We know his son Clayton Mitchell Sr. Um, uh, Clay's dad, Clay Mitchell, the speaker, was furious over Schaefer referring to the Eastern Shore as shithole on the shore. Um, I asked, was that why the Eastern Shore went Republican? And I was told by somebody from over there, no, as part of it. It contributed to it, but the bigger part of it was civil rights and race. A big part of Maryland did not want blacks and whites going to the same school. They didn't want equal housing. They didn't want to eat in a restaurant with black people. There's still a lot of that. I mean, they had their Confederate boys statue up until recently, and that's a big issue. When you take a look at the Republican counties, a big part of the Republican base in Maryland is built on racism. But in Talbot is a county that has got a lot of high income, upper income, very educated people because it attracts people who want to live in in that county because well it's just a popular place to live, so it gets higher income people, and consequently it's a county that can go blue on occasion. It went for Biden over Trump. Um, if Biden had been black, it would have been a much harder sell. But that's the nature. We're seeing things um, as the people get more educated and we mature as a people, as a country, as a state. Um, Hopefully, we'll see this fade, but it's a process. Frederick is interesting. Frederick was Democratic, of course, a long time ago, flipped Republican. Um, Again, over civil rights was a big part of it. Uh, you know, there was a reaction when Martin Luther King was having his Million Man March or any of his protests, or they were sicking the dogs on people in Montgomery, Alabama. Um, there were people who didn't want change and consequently pushed back against the change. Frederick was one of those counties. The rural areas were more likely to be white and more likely to be, I don't know a nice way to put it. I hate to call them racist, but um, in places where racial harmony was not high on the agenda. Um, then what happened? Now, Frederick is a predominantly blue county. Um, Harris won nicely. Hogan won, but part of it was because people knew him. He also had real estate in the area, so Hogan was a known quantity, so he ran well there. But Trump got 44% of the vote. Hogan got 54%. We've got to attribute a lot of that to better educated people. But Frederick's interesting because the biggest change why it's gone Democratic is Route 70 and Route 270. They build interstate highways from more expensive areas, Baltimore, Montgomery County, DC, Northern Virginia. It made it easy for somebody working in the district to move out by going up 270 and being able to afford a bigger house, a better house, more bedrooms, more bathrooms, all those things. You could get more bang for the buck in Frederick than you can in Potomac or any of those. The more expensive places close. Uh, Chevy Chase, a small 3 or 4 bedroom bungalow um, could be over $1 million at Chevy Chase, mostly because it's convenient to downtown. People working, living there can work in town pretty easily. Uh, you pay a lot more money because of the easy commute. Plus, it's it's got a certain je ne sais quoi because of the people who live there, because high income people and all that. But anyway, when they built the interstates out to Frederick, now we've gotten more and more houses being built, townhouses being built, real estate development, people living in Frederick, working in closer to DC, um, and those people are Democrats. So you see, Frederick's got two legislative districts primarily. Um, you've got one that covers the bulk of the county. So when you take a look at it, virtually the whole county is that district. And then right down on the southern side around Frederick, it's like a donut hole punched out of the rest of the county. That's heavily Democratic. The rest of the county is Republican, but it's where the people came to build their houses, buy their homes, move. Well, here's a term for it: suburbanization of Frederick. When Frederick became suburbs as opposed to rural, that's when it flipped from Republican to Democrat. Calvert, on the other hand, doesn't have nearly that. And when we compare the Trump vote versus the Hogan vote, we don't see the big disparity. Um, we see a little bit of a difference. Hogan certainly lives just north of Calvert County, so he's more of a known quantity. He'd do better. Um, Angela is still black, so you know Calvert is not the friendliest place in the world for black voters. It's not as bad as some of the counties, but we have all these factors going into it. Um, Hartford's interesting. Um, Harvard has had a lot of growth over the years from people who moved out of Baltimore and Baltimore County because they wanted to get away from school integration. They wanted to get to schools where it was predominantly white, so they moved to Harvard. But now we're getting a mixture of better educated, higher income people, and they live primarily along the strip, um, heavily between like 95 and the Bay. That area right along the Bay Coast has changed. Harvard to Grace is 34, Legislative District 34. Harvard to Grace itself is 34B with two delegates. Both of them are Democrats. Um, I think I can't think of who's the delegate from 34B, but I believe that that person's a Republican. We see that sort of thing. The closer to the water in Harford County, the more likely they are to be Democrats. We're going to see a change. We still have the more racist, redneck, rural interior, but as people move out and homes are being built, every time you see a new cluster of townhouses or single family homes being built in a place like Harford, it's a knife into the heart of the Republican establishment. We've seen the same thing in Anne Arundel County. Uh, in Anne Arundel, areas that used to be heavily Republican are now shifting, and we're going to see more of a shift. It's going to be more difficult for the Republicans to hold their seats in northern Anne Arundel County. Um, Kent County is interesting. Uh, when we talk about the Eastern Shore being Republican, it's Republican. But then you take a look at Kent County, and Donald Trump could only beat Kamala Harris by 3%, 50 to 47. I mean, this is not a huge difference. This is the kind of place where we need to focus in future elections, like in 26, when we're trying to reelect Wes Moore. We need to focus on voter registration, get our people registered, and then get our people to the polls. And then suddenly, whether or not we win Kent or any of the Eastern Shore counties isn't that big a deal as much as it is to um, cut the Republican vote down. Um, Donald Trump should have won the Eastern Shore counties by 70% of the vote. Instead, he he won Kent 50 to 47, which means that if we can hold them and not let them run up the votes in places like the Eastern Shore, and then when you bring in the votes from the 95 corridor, we crush them. We can't assume that it's safe to just rely on a 7 county strategy. 7 counties isn't enough. I'm a firm believer in a 24 county strategy. I think the state party needs to understand that they need to have some people handling. It was a fight in this last election. Um, John Dixon, Democratic chairman of Cecil County, wanted somebody dedicated to working in his area, and then they cut down to a 7 county plan and just aced Cecil right off the map. And then John raised hell until he got it put back in. I don't think they went back to a 24 county strategy, but I think John got him to add Cecil to the you know, to the funds available for from the 95 corridor. And that's important. We need to cut Republican vote wherever we can by fighting them in Kent, fighting them in Cecil, fighting them in Talbot, and so on. I mean, we're seeing places where we can pick up vote, hold the Republicans down. If we can keep a Donald Trump or a Larry Hogan, you know, Hogan got 57% of the vote. He didn't get 70%. If we can work hard to make sure that the Republicans don't run away in a state election with the Eastern Shore and hold them into fighting distance, then we're going to do better. We aren't going to see somebody like a Hogan slipping in and getting elected to office. Wacomico County is another one on the Eastern Shore. The Sorry about that. It's tough getting a phone call during the time when I'm trying to record. Anyway, Wacomico is another Eastern Shore county where we have the chance to hold the Republicans to a minimal vote. You know, it's better to get Republicans polling 51% like Trump did rather than running it up to 70. We didn't see the big Republican wins on the county. Now, people are saying, well, Trump did better. Well, he did maybe better, but if we can hold Republican counties to 51% of the vote, we'll be in good shape going into the 26 and then 28, 30, 32 elections. I mean, this is a long term strategy. We need to register people. We need to get them to the polls. We need to identify people. We need to recruit um, our college young Democrats, um, our people who have some interest. We need to encourage them to come out. We need to get involved. We need to organize. Um, we can't assume that it's always going to fall into our lap. Well, it would be nice if it did, but we need to fight harder for the counties that, you know, where we have a chance to do better. And that's the end of this program. I'd like to thank everybody who listened to it. I know this is probably not the most interesting for some people. I know people enjoy it when I'm ripping somebody up, but let's talk about politics sometimes. And I think it's worthwhile. Have a great day, and thank you for listening.